traditional gender roles and processes of mythology in adolescence. Before I get started, I want to get clear about what I mean when I say gender. I'm not referring to biological sex, which is a common association, but I'm actually talking about the social identity in regards to gender. Pretty much since humans have been organizing in society, there's been some concept of gender roles and constructs, and those gender groups can help determine your roles and responsibilities in society, the way you think about yourself, the way you interact with others, and the way you express yourself, or the way you might perform in society. And it's important to note that in different cultures, gender can mean different things, but there are some constructs of it. And the two gender groups we're most used to are masculine groups, right, or men and boys, and feminine groups, or women. And with these two groups, right, the men and the women, there are obviously differences in experiences, right? Women experience gender differently than men do. But even within these gender groups, there's a diversity in experience, right? So one woman might relate to her gender in a way that's different than another woman relates to her gender. We don't really necessarily understand or research this diversity in gender. And one reason why mine might be in 2013, gender identity disorder was considered a psychological disorder and was not removed from the DSM until the most recent publication. So gender nonconformity is something that we haven't really looked at or considered at all very recently. And so actually, before I get started with this, I want to kind of explain why I've done this research, right? There are a lot of good reasons to look at gender. I work with the social justice group in St. Louis, and we have a lot of conversations about what gender means, gender nonconformity, what that experience looks like. And when coming to understand that, I kind of heard two sides of a unique story. One side came from people that were maybe new to this information and thought that, well, there are a lot of things we do to conform to gender, right? There are people that don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, right? There are a lot of problems associated with gender, so we should just get rid of it. Gender is harmful for us as a society. And there's another group that say, no, having an identity, having an expression, having a way to identify with the group is very empowering. I love identifying as a woman. I just wish it wasn't so correlated to my genital assignment at birth. And so that's really the scope of this research. And one explanation of sort of this discomfort that can be associated with gender nonconformity is gender schema theory. And that basically states that gender is a cognitive schema, which means it's a predetermined framework. And when we take in new information, we sort of organize it and understand it through this framework. So the statement that gender is a schema, right? Everything that we learn is being sort of organized or sorted in terms of gender. Things that interrupt the schema might be not well remembered, not learned, or it could cause discomfort and dissonance, right? Things that don't line up with how we think of the world are uncomfortable for us, right? And so that's what gender schema theory means. And basically what we're saying here is that traditional gender beliefs, right, the idea that men are one specific way and women are another specific way, is our way of measuring sort of the internalization or the existence of that gender schema. And so what we're looking at is these traditional gender beliefs and what the dissonance or disruption or discomfort associated with those gender beliefs looks like. We also know that gender can mean different things in different culture, and we know that race, especially in the United States, can have an indication on how you culturally identify. So we wanted to look at differences in race in terms of gender constructs. So in order to examine this, we have this statistical analysis model. So we've got our independent variable, which is gender identity. So that's how masculine the participants identified. And then the dependent variable is depressive symptomatology, so basically their self-esteem. And then we have what's called a moderating variable. And what that means is we're looking at the pre-existing relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. So we're basically saying there's some relationship between your gender identity and your depression. But we want to look at how much your internalization of traditional gender beliefs impacts your depression that's associated with your gender identity. So for this research, we used the Maryland Adolescent Development in Context study. I thought it was kind of interesting that we're here in Maryland, and my sample is from Maryland. This is a study that started at the University of Colorado and later moved to the University of Michigan. It's in the Harvard Research Archive, so no IRB approval is necessary. The N size was approximately 1,050 students, and this particular wave was taken in the participants' 11th grade year of high school. The year was 1996 when the data was collected, and it's pretty diverse socioeconomically. And one thing you'll notice also is that the mean age was 16 to 17. It's unique in that there was a significant African American population, and so that is also part of why we looked at race in this study. So for our independent variable, we had gender identity, and that was just an assessment of how participants identified in terms of masculinity. So you'll see here's a Likert scale from not at all masculine to very masculine, and participants were asked to fill this out. But actually on the Matic sample, on the Matic survey, both a Likert scale from not at all masculine to very masculine, as well as a Likert scale from not at all feminine to very feminine was included in the study. However, as per the request of the Maddox researchers, and to simplify our variables and really get a cohesive single independent variable, we reverse coded all things that were feminine. So a low femininity would be equal to a high masculinity in terms of your masculine identity. And then we have male-female norms in addition, and that's just kind of giving a further idea of how participants were comfortable with and identified with their gender. And then we have depressive symptomatology, and this is really kind of looking at self-esteem and satisfaction with life. So pretty in-depth bit of sample, but just to get a feel, low depressive symptomatology would be, I feel okay with myself, someone loves me, I'm just as good as other kids. And then high depressive symptomatology would be, no one cares about me, I'm not as good as other people, or I consider ending my life often. So that's just kind of what we're looking at. And our moderating variable, right, this is the thing that we're really looking at to see what it does to our gender identity and our depressive symptomatology, is the traditional gender beliefs, right? And this is just an internalization of men are one way, women are another way. It's a very rigid construct of gender. So things like it's usually better if the man is a breadwinner and the woman stays at home. And my personal favorite item from this piece is, it bothers me to see a man being told what to do by a woman. So these are our means and standard deviations, and what we did was a hierarchical regression analysis, and what that means is in every step of the regression analysis using SPSS correlation and an ANOVA test, we introduced different variables, and you can see that better on this table, and that's in order to understand what variables cause statistical significance, right? And so we separated it by boys and girls, and we also control for factors like socioeconomic status that typically can cause depression for depressive symptomatology. And so here we've just got the relationship in step 2 between gender identity and depressive symptomatology. And so there was statistical significance as determined by p-value less than 0.001. So there's statistical significance for both boys and girls in that their depression is related to their gender identity. But once you introduce the moderating variable, the traditional gender beliefs, there was only statistical significance for boys. And that significance can be shown in this table. So this is a really interesting part of the results because it really captures the difference between boys with low masculinity or less gender conforming boys and boys with high masculinity or gender conforming boys. So right off the bat, we've got low, medium, and high masculinity. And so immediately you might notice that the more masculine that a boy identifies, the higher his depression is. However, this changes based on how much he has internalized these traditional gender beliefs. So boys who are very gender conforming, right, with high masculinity, the more that they endorse traditional gender beliefs, their depression increases. However, for boys that are less gender conforming, right, for boys that don't identify as very masculine boys, the more that they endorse traditional gender beliefs, their depression decreases. This really supports gender schema theory in that there is some level of discomfort with an interruption of schema, or there is some comfort associated with having a framework to understand the way we live and the way that people group around us, right? So that boys with low masculinity, even though they didn't identify with the traditional gender beliefs, right? Even if they didn't feel they were very masculine, their depression still decreased because of having a concept at all that boys are one way and girls are another way. Whereas there was higher depression when they were like, I don't know if girls are one way and boys are another way. I don't really believe in these constructs. However, the opposite was true for boys with high masculinity. So this really supports, again, gender schema theory and our comfort, as well as the differences in experiences that people can have based on their gender identity and with respect to gender. And another thing that we noticed in our analysis was that for girls, higher masculinity actually meant lower depression. And we did a post hoc analysis on race because, again, we were looking at racial relations, and we didn't find anything with respect to gender, but we did find that African American boys had the highest rates of depression out of any other group, and we thought that was worth mentioning. So one of the limitations from this study is that Maddox's sample was taken from 1996. Many researchers might say that that is outdated. However, people that would have participated in this study as adolescents are now still adults and still interacting with gender identity on some level. Femininity was not measured, and that's probably a big part of why we didn't find statistical significance with girls. And gender identity wasn't technically part of the survey. While we did analyze masculinity, we didn't necessarily ask if people identified as gender non-conforming or gender conforming. Future research might look at parent relationships because that plays a significant role in how we become aware of our gender. And last but not least, I'd like to acknowledge my research mentor, Sharita Butler-Barnes. She made the data set available to me and made SPSS available to me and really supported me, as well as the researchers at Maddox, without whom I would have no statistical significance because I wouldn't have a sample size that was so good. As well as Kathleen Dwyer, who is a science research teacher at my school, who has a class entirely devoted to science research, which creates great opportunities for students that most high school students cannot dream of having. So I appreciate all of that, and I can take questions.